Some good news this week. We had the Australian May Consumer Price Index, and it was a little bit lower than expected, 4% year on year. Expectations were a little bit higher than that. Headline inflation fell over the month because of a big drop in fuel prices, about 12% down, as we know from the fuel excise, mostly in Australia, and also some moderation in oil prices as well, because most of the issues around Hormuz were more in March and April. The trim mean, though, wasn't so good, up 3.6% over the year. And I think that's probably what the RBA is going to focus on when they meet next.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's still consistent with the RBA hiking rates again, which is not good news. So you get good news, headline rates lower, cost of living is not going up as rapidly, although 4% is still rapid growth. But the real problem is the underlying rate's still going up. But at least we can take some comfort from the fact that that graph that our colleague me puts up every week shows more ships going through the Strait of Hormuz following the peace deal.
So oil prices should probably come down even further. I mean, they're already lower than $80 a barrel, but back to their $60 level marks, I think looks like it could happen in the next few months.
Yeah. But anyway, I thought we'd do something different, or we thought we'd do something different this time, because we're always rattling off about the latest economic data and what's happening in the Middle East, and it gets kind of monotonous after a while. And this issue of, there sort of seems to be this feeling around that everyone's feeling a degree of angst or grievance that the economy's not working for them, that things are terrible.
Yeah, and it's both in Australia and overseas too.
It's a global phenomenon. And when you look at happiness numbers, they've been sort of trending down. And I kind of wonder, well, what do you think of that? Do you think that's a real thing, or is it
in
justified?
the last few years, I get it. Inflation's been high. That erodes people's purchasing power. Essential items, expenses have been even worse. Electricity, childcare, education, electricity, the stuff that you don't want to spend on, and people feel like their real wages haven't kept up with that. And of course, in Australia, we now have this feeling like people are disillusioned with the two main parties of the Liberal and the Labor Party. So they're choosing to vote for One Nation sort of as, an act against the two main parties.
So there's almost a desire to try and go back to the past, back to the 60s and 70s when I was growing up, or something like that.
People want to reminisce that in times before things were better. I mean, I think we always naturally do that. I think, things were so much easier for me even 10 years ago. And I think the population reminisces that things were easier for their parents or their grandparents. But were they?
I mean, if you look back at that period, there were some really good things about it. Unemployment was lower than it is today, 3.9%. I think it was even lower at the start of the decade. These days, we went through that huge high period, still 4.5%, a little bit higher than it was back then. Consumer confidence, I think on average back in the 70s, it was 105 on the Westpac Melbourne Institute reading today, lower than that. 80.6 in fact, so it's way below where it was back then. That 91.5 is the average so far this decade. So people are feeling a lot less confident. Home ownership rate back then, I think it started in the mid-60s, because you only get this census data every 5 years. In 1966, it was about 73%. Through the average in the 70s, the two censuses that occurred in the 70s, that's 71 and 76, it's averaged 65%. Today, it's only 63%. We all know the story about time taken to save for a deposit. These days, it's around 11 or 12 years. Back then, it was only 4 years. The average house price to income ratio, I think in that note you did the other day, is pushing around 10 times or something, thereabouts. Back then, it was 3 or 4 times. If we look at average, and we were paying less tax. The average person paid 20% of their income in tax. Today, it's about 25%. And at a broader level, we had less government regulation then. You were free to ride your bike down the road without a helmet on. You could play on the road. Parents let their kids play on the road at night. Dogs could roam free. We didn't have to worry about putting a leash on our dog. There was more family time. There was no risk of being bullied by cyber on social media. So a lot of things were pretty good back then.
Okay, but hang on. Let's just look at some of the metrics around how regulation may have actually helped the economy. The employment to population ratio, which looks at what proportion of the population is actually engaged in the workforce, that was 57% back in the 70s. And now it's higher at nearly 64%. But more importantly, it's the female participation rate, which is completely skyrocketed. It was just over 40% back in the 70s, and now it's at a record high of around 63%. So the access to education and employment for women has completely transformed the labour market for them. And that's helped to reduce the gender pay gap as well. That was 36% back in the 70s, and now it's about 13%. So still some room to go.
Yeah.
But that's helped women to feel more empowered through their finances and through getting some benefit of being engaged in the workforce. But, it's interesting. I think sometimes more choice hasn't necessarily been positive, which is what a lot of women say. Like, yes, they have more choice. If some don't have the choice to be able to stay at home and raise a family, but you have more choice to be able to get a job and get a job that you like and not have to quit your job after you get married. But maybe more of that choice has led to more stress in their lives because they feel like they have to do everything, and you can't really do everything.
But isn't that partly because men still do a lower level of household work?
Yeah, they do.
So women have stepped up to do more in terms of working, but men haven't taken on a lot of those household jobs.
But I guess the child
Perhaps.
caring responsibilities have been shifted to government support, nannies, babysitters, that type of thing. So yes, in terms of the work at home.
Back then there wasn't much childcare. If you wanted to go to work as a female and your husband was going to work as well, then there was no government childcare help that you were going to get.
And
you had to rely on a babysitter, and that was quite expensive.
Yeah. Well, childcare is still very expensive now. It's about $200 a day for those aged under 5 if you're just going to a normal childcare centre.
Yeah.
There is some rebate available there, but that's just the nominal rate that you're going to pay. I mean, and on inflation, the 1970s weren't a great time for inflation.
That was horrible for inflation. Just
under 10% at the moment. On today's numbers, it was headline 4%, but it's averaged about 3.7% since 2020.
I remember I opened I think it's a George Permanent Building Society account, and I was getting 10% interest. And I was so excited I went home and told my dad. This was when I was about 15 in 1975 or something. And he said, "Oh, that's great, son. That's fantastic. Just bear in mind the inflation rate's about 17%, so you're actually going backwards."
Was that your first experience with learning about
my first
inflation?
Experience with finance and inflation. And then I realised, you got to focus on the real rate of interest that you're getting, not the nominal rate.
Average earnings back in the 70s for a full-time person were $8,400 a year. That's for the male unit, actually. Average earnings now are about $106,000.
Yeah, that's good, but a paddle pop then would cost you 10 cents or something. What is it now? $1.50 or something. So
is that real adjusted?
No, I don't think it's adjusted. That's a nominal. So things nominally have certainly improved, but if you adjust for inflation or price rises over that period, they're not necessarily better. But even
real incomes have still gone up. So the real income in 1970 was around $31,000, and now it's $61,000.
That's double.
That's household disposable income per person.
And see, that's a more relevant comparison, I think. So real incomes in Australia per person have doubled compared to back then. Look, the one stat that gets me really excited was, I think about the 1970s, the furthest we would go on an overseas holiday was Norfolk Island. But I think on the stats that we've got, the average Australian would go for an overseas holiday in less than 1 year out of 10.
And now they go on one every 2 years.
There you go. So there's more and more Australians going on overseas holidays. Back then it just wasn't viable. It took too long. Planes were too slow. Well, not all of them, but a lot of them were slower. But the cost was just exorbitant.
But young people would say, well, it's all the baby boomers who are retired and going on holidays. I mean, I don't agree with that, because a lot of young people are traveling all around the world from a very young age. Even with school, they do things overseas if they're lucky enough to do that, and then they travel during uni. They can go on things like exchange. I mean, that never was available.
Yeah, it just wasn't available. Like if I went for somewhere when I was a kid, like in my 20s, it was like to the Blue Mountains or
camping.
Yeah, camping or something, or stay in a motel in Noosa or something. It was all very low level. It was all great. It was all great fun, but it wasn't the expense of today. The other thing, if you go to your local shopping centre back then, you would find a fish and chip shop, a hamburger shop. There might be a good quality restaurant, but it was very much Anglo food, and there might be one Chinese shop. These days, it's ultra diverse.
Well, that's because we have a multicultural society rather than monocultural, right?
So we certainly have a far more diverse population these days. Back in 1970s, about 20% of Australians were born overseas. Now it's about 29%. So we're still very much relying on immigrants, but the bulk of the immigrants came from Europe. I think of the foreign-born population in the 1970s, about 86% were from UK and Europe combined, whereas now that number is down to 30%. A much bigger share comes from Asia and, of course, Middle East and North Africa.
And that's allowed us to have more diversity and choice in products and goods in the marketplace.
Well, that's the way I would see it. It's led to a more interesting society in Australia. I mean, to give you an example, and I think you went there as well, Japan, I had a great holiday earlier this year. Lovely place, but it is very monocultural. And
they like it that way?
Well, I think they do. I think the Japanese like it that way. But it's also, from my perspective, it looks kind of, in some ways, everyone, this sort of monocultural sort of thing is somewhat boring in a way. Whereas in Australia, you've got a lot more diversity of choice. Like I can go to our local shopping centre and see, restaurants from all over the place. Vietnamese, Chinese, Japanese.
Even in Avalon.
Even in Avalon. That's true, even in Avalon. But I think that's led to a richer life compared to the one that we had back in the 70s.
Well, again, it's this option of choice. You're talking about, back then the local shopping centre had a fish and chip shop, whereas now you have so much variety of shops, toys for kids everywhere. Like the cost of toys for children from places like Kmart, Target, Big W, you can just get stuff that's just costs nothing basically. And I saw my parents had some shoes that my sister wore as a teenager, Clark's school shoes, and they still had the price on the box, and there was $80 for these leather shoes. Yeah. Whereas now I pay $50 for my kids' school shoes. So that's deflation over that whole period of time. $80 back then for shoes was a lot of money. Yeah, it was. I mean, it's also interesting in cars. Back then, 1/3 market share went to the Holden Kingswood, which, beautiful car. I mean, my family had a Kingswood and I've had Holdens for much of my life. But now the most popular selling car in Australia is the Ford Ranger. It only has a 4.6% share. There's so many brands out there, so much choice that I wouldn't be able to even name them all. And that's globalisation at work. That's globalisation, but in some ways it's good. It gives Australians a lot more choice. And I think if you take that away from them and say, well, we're just going to go back to what we had and make all the cars ourselves, we only have 3 car producers like we used to have, or in some ways limit it by government control or whatever, Australians ultimately would be worse off because you would have less choice. And we can't really go back to those times anyways. And consumers are spending more on services. If we look now, about 65% of household consumption is on services, whereas before it was more like 48%. So people are spending more on goods. So people like the experiences now, which is what young people say as well. They don't want to give physical goods. They like overseas travel or spending on a concert or music show or eating out even. That's all part of the services economy, and you can see that it's so busy everywhere you go in Australia, especially across the capital cities. But that's partly a factor explaining why home ownership is lower. The avocado toast generation. Well, that's right. The avocado on toast. Who was the guy? Bernard Salt. Bernard Salt. It was a good line, that one. Although he claimed that he wasn't saying it, he was just writing an article, and that's what baby boomers might say. Maybe he was thinking that himself. I don't know. But if you think about it these days, I mean, if you just look at those numbers in terms of university participation, back then it was about 20% of 18 to 19-year-olds. Today it's about 40% or more. So people spend a lot more time in university. More kids go on to year 12. And then when they do go to year 12, a lot of them go into university. So immediately you've delayed the time that you enter the workforce. And then when you do get into the workforce, you want to have some fun. You want to go on an overseas holiday. You want to take advantage of cafes. I mean, it wasn't really a choice for me because I just had milk bars, and the milk bars were all kind of nice. But I would say that a modern cafe with avocado and toast is a far better option than some people are going to argue with this one than a greasy hamburger. But is too much choice bad for us? Like I was sort of saying with the female participation, you can do the work, you can be at home. Now, if there's too much choice on Netflix, you can't figure out what you're going to watch and you just spend, I don't know, I spend half an hour sometimes thinking, I don't know what I'm going to watch. I'm just not going to watch anything. Or if there's too much choice with restaurants, you look at Uber Eats, like I can't even figure out what I'm going to decide. If you only had one option there in front of you, you might procrastinate less and be more decisive and
so
do
you're
things
saying
quicker.
People are less happy because there's too much choice now.
Maybe.
It's a classic example of where more is not necessarily better than less. I mean, that could well be, but by the same token,
people don't know what to think.
Well, they could think for themselves, but is the solution to that say, well, let's take away all the choice? Go back to the simpler times of the 60s and 70s where you didn't have the choice. You didn't have the number of cars to buy. You didn't have the sort of clothes to buy.
But we can't really do that. It's never going to go back to that time because we're a much more globalized economy now.
Yeah.
So the choice is always going to be there. I think maybe people just need to get better at not procrastinating. I mean, was that even a word or a term a few decades ago? This is sort of a new thing to me that's sort of been brought up in the last 10 years. People procrastinate more because I feel like people are lazier these days. They don't have to work as hard because, I mean, despite the labour force stats which you brought out at the beginning, the labour market has been in really good shape in recent years in Australia.
So it's been much easier to get a job.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about if you lose your job, you won't get another one.
You'll probably get another one relatively easily. We've basically had one job vacant for every unemployed person out there. So I just feel like the hustling that young people may have used to have had, you know, after the GFC, I sort of started as a graduate after the GFC. It was, I mean, it's really difficult to get a grad position these days, but I feel like there was more of this hustle type of culture that young people had, and people were really hungry to try and work and to try and get a good job, and they had to prove themselves. I just don't see that anymore.
But say if you look at another stat in comparison there is share of government spending on welfare. So we've got a slightly bigger government sector than back then, but a bigger chunk of government spending goes on welfare. Back then it was 28%. Today it's around 41%.
It's a huge problem.
We didn't have much spending on disability care. We didn't even have the NDIS. Yes, we had unemployment benefits. They called it the dole back then. But beyond that, there wasn't much. Government didn't take care of us. And I kind of wonder, like we had the GFC, massive government spending program that got us out of that. We were the only country in the world, or only major country that didn't have a recession. And so maybe there's an expectation from people that government will always look after us.
There's the expectation that the government will look after you. And at the same time, people don't understand that you have to fund that expectation through taxes. Money just doesn't come out of thin air for the government. Well, it sort of does when the debt increases, but actually they have to match that spending with money from somewhere. So they have to tax us more. So how can we have these high expectations that the government's going to help us through welfare or through having good roads or through having good schools and good education standards, and yet we don't want to see the higher tax that goes with it? They
can print money. Some people might be thinking that. They can print money, but that just causes inflation, which is a de facto tax anyway. I agree with you. I mean, the other things that struck me about this comparison is life expectancy has gone up dramatically. I mean, there was a stat that used to get wheeled out. You know, when the pension was introduced in Australia, I think it was about 1910 or thereabouts, and the age for the pension was set at 65 for a male, but life expectancy was about 55. So it was literally insurance because most people never got to that level, whereas today when you look at life expectancy for a female, back then it was about 77 years. Now it's 85 years. For a male, it's gone from almost 70, males gone from about 70 years to 81 years. So people are living longer lives. Healthcare is far superior compared to what it was back then.
But maybe people have more chronic diseases at that age.
Well, you do, but most of the evidence suggests that people are also living a higher quality of life. A lot of things that used to knock people off no longer do.
The other thing is homicide rates and car deaths. I mean, they've completely fallen off a cliff. The homicide rate was 1.8 per 100,000 per year back in the 70s. Now it's sub 1. Road deaths.
So it's halved.
Yeah, it's halved. So road deaths have declined by 85% since the 1970s peak, and that's due to regulation because of seatbelts. And also probably better safety standards in cars as well.
Better quality cars and speed limit enforcement and
taxes on the roads.
All these things that we hate, but we're actually a lot safer off. than we were back then. I mean, that's despite the number of motor vehicles per person going from around 0.5 to 0.8. There's almost one car for every 2 people in Australia, whereas back then it was close to one car for every 4 people.
So overall,
we got more cars and less road deaths per person.
So overall, I'd say that today we are much better off on the broad set of metrics.
So why have we become a nation of whingers then? How can the consumer confidence figures be so low today at like on that Westpac measure that I mentioned up front? Everyone was so happy back then, 105. Today it's 81. So it's 20, 25% lower than it was back then. But in reality, you go through all these stats, most of them show that we're better off.
Well, I think people don't appreciate the hindsight. They didn't live through the 70s. Maybe they don't. Well, you did. And it was
a nice time to live through, but I was just a kid. You know, kids usually enjoy their if you live in a loving family, a nice area, you have a good time.
But I think the average person doesn't see the hindsight. Maybe they don't look at the stats, and they feel hard done by, and their expectations are too high. To me, I think it's just that expectations of people are too high these days, and we haven't really had it tough in Australia for a long time.
So you want to have another recession?
I'm not calling for a recession at all. We want to avoid that for sure, but I think people need to
appreciate what we've got.
Yeah, maybe reset their expectations and actually see that they're in a pretty good situation, and there are a lot of people who are much worse than them in many parts of the world, in most parts of the world.
And none of this is denied. There are people in Australia doing it tough. There are.
Absolutely.
But most of the stats indicate that we're doing pretty well. I kind of wonder whether there's a sort of a people, some of the happiness studies show that as you get richer, you don't get happier because you can actually see other people getting richer than you. So it's a relative sort of thing. And that you are actually better off, but you see signs of exorbitant wealth in the billionaires around the world or what have you, and that makes you feel sad that
keeping up with the Joneses.
You're not keeping up with the Joneses, and whether social media just accentuates this. In
the 2014 budget that Joe Hockey tried to push through with Abbott, he said the age of entitlement is over. I mean, not that really helped because the budget never went through, but they had a lot.
Well, that led to a huge backlash. Almost not as. I think it's on some measures not as quite as the backlash against the current budget.
I don't know, but I think maybe we're all too entitled these days.
Well, maybe. I mean, that was about some cutbacks to welfare spending, and that led to a huge backlash. But you do sort of wonder that as each generation gets materially better off than their parents. I mean, when I grew up, if you wanted to wind down the window in the car, you had to wind the winder, and sometimes they would not work. These days, if you grow up never having a winder, you would expect a button you push to wind down the window and wind it up. And so you naturally come to think, well, that's the sort of thing you're entitled to. When you get a car, you should have that in there. So maybe as time goes on, your people's expectations shift up to a higher level.
Yeah.
And then when you're not meeting that, then you feel depressed, even though you are actually far better off than your parents' generation were.
I think the thing that we didn't touch on was the community aspect. So maybe people feel like they don't have a community to rely on, or that their community is actually all online now, and they have these interactions with people that they don't even know.
That's a fake community.
It is fake, but back in the 70s, people lived closer to their parents, to their grandparents, or you'd have multi-generations living in one home. You could have support for childcare or other caring responsibilities, whereas now you have these suburbs where there's no grandchildren because young families can't afford to live in them.
I think there was a better sense of community back then, and more would participate in volunteer groups like Lions Club or Rotary.
But that's because they had more time.
Yeah, I know. It's partly because they had more time. And the men would do that because they weren't expected to be as involved with their kids anymore. So if now you've got to spend more time taking your kids to sport, mind you, my father did back then as well, but if you've got to do that, then you have less time to go off and be a member of Rotary or Lions Club or play golf. There's a complaint that golf club use was going down because men don't have time to do that anymore.
People are probably also busier at work because the expectations at work have gone up. You can take your laptop home. You've got your phone that you can look at all the time. So you're not really focused when you're at home and engaging in home life.
Yeah. So what's the solution to all of this? I mean, some say, well, we should go back to a simpler, calmer Australia, a monocultural monoculture Australia. Is that the solution?
Well, I think running through the stats that we just went through shows that it's actually better now. In terms of its statistics-wise, the monoculture wasn't as good for the average consumer.
Yeah. Materially, people weren't better off. They were actually worse off. They had shorter lifespans. It was heavily skewed in favour of men against women. People were less educated.
But it's probably also about getting productivity growth up in Australia, because that has been flat for about 10 years, and real household disposable income has been more or less flat over that time too. So in the last 10 years, middle incomes have stagnated, which has made people feel concerned.
But as part of a solution to that, I mean, I was talking about regulation at the start. There was a lot less regulation back then. Maybe the regulation pendulum's gone too far.
Yeah, it probably has.
We've over-regulated and it's become a bit of a nanny state.
Yeah, I agree for sure.
So what's the answer, Deanna?
I think there's a few answers. People will say, you're just economists looking at average numbers and I'm having a really hard time, which I can understand.
Some people will say that, yeah.
I can understand that. But there are always going to be hard times. There are many ups and downs in your life. It's not going to be smooth sailing. The government's not going to come and support you all the time. You have to support yourself. You have to have a budget in place. You have to figure out where you're going to be spending your money. You have to find a way to grow your wealth. And that's really important. But at the same time, I think we need to refocus our expectations a little bit and take a bit of a broader picture. If you have a relatively good dwelling and you have a mortgage, well, you're actually probably doing really well, even though you might be feeling like you're spending a huge chunk of your income on your mortgage. You've gotten into the property market, and it will just get easier over time as you get more of a high principal ownership in your home. I think people's expectations around, spending on goods and overseas holidays need to be reset a little bit, because not everyone in the world is out there doing that. And maybe just your social media feed feels like everyone's going to Europe, but they're probably not. So I think a reset in expectations, appreciate what you have, and understand that you have to work hard to get somewhere in life. Things are not just going to be handed to you.
I'd agree with that. I mean, there's no doubt that some people out there are struggling, but all the stats indicate that most Australians are actually materially better off. But I think it's also partly recognising that material things aren't necessarily the key to happiness. I mean, they are to a point, but at some point you've got to realise you are on a bit of a hedonic treadmill in a way, working harder and harder, and that extra thing you get may not necessarily solve all your problems or make you any happier. So I think it's all about gratitude for what we all have. Life in Australia is pretty good. Often on those trips that many Australians go on overseas, on average, one every 2 years, whenever you go there and you come back to Australia, you think, this is a pretty good place to be in. And I always get back and think, my holiday's over. That's kind of sad. I've back to work again. Mind you, actually, I like work. But I also realise how good Australia is. It does do things reasonably well. And that's something to be happy about. But more broadly, I think it's about making sure you've got connections with your family, making sure you're connected in the community. Don't spend all your time at work. Get a good work-life balance.
And don't sweat the small stuff.
Don't sweat the small stuff and be happy. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Deanna.
Thanks, Shane. See you next time.
Will do.